My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 37, a single mom, and I've spent most of my adult life walking on eggshells around people who claim to love me. I never thought I'd be the one kicked out of a family funeral, but here we are. It started with the passing of my father. He wasn't perfect, but he was the only one in that family who ever showed me real kindness. When I got the call he was gone, something inside me cracked, not from shock, but from all the grief I had buried under years of silence. The service was held at St. Thomas Church, a place I hadn't stepped foot in since I was a teenager. I walked in alone, wearing a plain black dress, holding the same photo of Dad I used to keep in my high school locker. It was the only thing I had left that felt like him. My older sister, Vanessa, stood near the casket with a smug look that made my skin crawl. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she accused me of being too dramatic, after our mother screamed at me in front of her friends for bringing home community college brochures. She looked me up and down like I didn't belong. "You're not listed on the program," she whispered, blocking my path. "This is for family." I stared at her. "I am family. Dad was my father too." She scoffed, her voice low but laced with venom. "He wouldn't want you here." I could have walked away. I should have walked away. But all those years of staying quiet, of shrinking myself just to keep the peace, they caught fire. I stepped past her and stood at the front of the room. The room fell quiet. All eyes turned toward me. I could feel the judgment, the discomfort, but I wasn't going to let them erase me anymore. "I know most of you probably didn't expect me to speak," I began, my voice trembling but steady. "But I loved my father. And unlike some people in this room, he never treated me like I was disposable." Gasps. Murmurs. Vanessa's face flushed red. "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because I deserve to grieve him. He didn't care that I didn't finish college. He didn't care that I'm a single mom. He cared that I tried. That I showed up. That I never gave up, even when the rest of you shut me out." Vanessa hissed, "Sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." I turned to her, finally letting years of pain bleed through my voice. "No. You embarrassed yourself when you let Mom pit us against each other. You embarrassed yourself when you let her shame me for having my daughter at 19, and you said nothing." I didn't wait for anyone's approval. I walked to the casket, laid the photo of Dad beside him, and whispered, "I'm sorry it took me this long to stand up for myself. But I'm here now." As I turned to leave, someone grabbed my arm. It was my Aunt Carol, the only one who ever sent me birthday cards after the fallout. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "He would have been too." I walked out into the sunlight feeling raw but free, like I'd finally buried more than just a parent. I'd buried their control, their shame, and the version of me that was too afraid to speak. That day, I didn't just lose my father. I found myself. Every morning, the scent drifted up through the old floorboards like a balm, a blend of rosemary, wood, and something that felt like peace. It was a soft kind of welcome, a world away from the cold, perfumed air of Chicago's high-rise elevators and polished boardrooms. At first, I hardly left the apartment. But I didn't feel trapped. I felt still. And that was new. I moved slowly, not because I was drained, but because, for the first time in years, there was no one to chase, no one to impress, and no deadline pressing on my spine. The silence wasn't haunting anymore. It felt earned. Gentle. Like the house knew how many battles I'd fought just to stand inside it. On my third morning there, I walked down a sleepy block, past a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon and something caramelized, and signed a 6-month lease for a tiny studio above an old bookshop. The place had massive windows that caught the morning light like it was something sacred. When I filled out the rental paperwork, I paused before writing my name. Elaine. Just Elaine. No Manning. No Hargrave. Not a new identity, just the old one I'd been too afraid to hold on to. The one I'd lost somewhere between legal statements and late-night interviews. Between courtrooms and clipped headlines. Back at the apartment, I opened a new notebook, soft-backed, with a stitched fabric spine. I turned to the first clean page and wrote 2 words at the top in slow, careful ink. Still Root. It was a name I'd whispered to myself for years. Back when I still dreamed of having my own shop, a little place filled with potted herbs, wild greenery, dried lavender, succulents in mismatched clay pots. A place that felt grounded, lived in, quiet, but never small. And then, I found it. The storefront had dusty windows and cracked tile floors. But it had charm, not the curated kind, but the kind that hadn't been remodeled into sterility. It sat on the corner of a sleepy street, tucked between a coffee shop and a public park. The owner, Deb, was a retired schoolteacher with a dry wit and eyes that had seen enough heartbreak to recognize someone trying to rebuild. She said she liked my energy. Said I felt steady. I smiled and told her, I'm trying. She handed me the keys. The space wasn't broken, just tired. Worn down by time, not trauma. I painted it myself over the next week, listening to Nina Simone and Billie Holiday as I worked. I hung string lights in the windows, scrubbed the counters, and placed crates of hardy plants on the sidewalk, ones that could survive the cold morning air. Still Root opened on a Tuesday. There was no grand opening, no hashtags, no influencer partnerships. Just a chalkboard sign leaning against the wall, and the scent of rosemary drifting through the door. My first customer was a college kid buying a cactus for his girlfriend. Said she had a history of killing plants and was hoping this one might survive her. My second customer was an older woman who wandered in asking about basil. Her husband, now gone, used to grow it every spring on their windowsill. I told her, not yet, but come back Friday. That night, I ordered basil starters from a local nursery. Just because. Time began to move differently. Slower. Softer. I made simple meals, lentils, eggs, toast, and tea. I walked in the mornings with a scarf wrapped tight and no destination. I stopped pouring wine at sunset. Started watching the sky instead. My phone barely rang anymore. When it did, it was either Deb checking in or a crayon drawing from Junie, my niece, who had never once forgotten me. Then, one Friday, a letter slipped under my door. No knock. No sender. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was careful, almost hesitant. I hope you'll forgive us one day. Your father says hello. No return address. No apology. Just a wound dressed up as a whisper. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew every loop and slant of that handwriting, the way it tried to say something without actually saying anything. I tucked it in the drawer next to a few old postcards and a pair of vintage earrings my mother used to wear to church. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't something you handed out like party favors. It had to begin with yourself. And even then, it took time. And grace. Later that afternoon, I was watering baskets of mint and thyme when the mailman stopped again. He handed me a bright yellow envelope with red bubble letters that barely fit on the front. Inside was purple construction paper folded in half. A stick figure version of me stood in front of a courthouse, arms wide, a cape fluttering behind. The flag in the background had too many stars. Across the top, in bold marker, were the words, "My hero." It was from Junie. I sat right there on the steps and cried. Not from sadness, but from the kind of release that tastes like eucalyptus and sunlight. It was the kind of cry that says, it's over. It's finally, truly over. That night, I polished the front window. I carved a plaque from cedar and burned the letters in by hand. She remembered who she was. And the game changed. A week later, a man walked in during a slow, mid-morning stretch. Salt and pepper hair. Tired jacket. He held a pot of rosemary in one hand and a curious look in the other. He glanced at the sign above the counter. Still Root? He asked. What does that mean? I smiled, brushing soil off my apron. It means that even the things buried deep still find a way to grow. Because sometimes, power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from choosing peace. From planting something, watching it bloom, and letting the silence speak louder than the headlines ever did. Elaine didn't have to set the world on fire. She just had to step out of the ashes. And remember who she was.